and 50 female domestic workers. According to recent data, there have been no prosecutions of Omani nationals for treatment of domestic workers. Oman's Labour Ministry has told the BBC forced labour is illegal, and it has only received one complaint from a Malawian domestic worker in the 2 years to 2023.
The policy board of Japan's central bank meets on Monday amid expectations it will raise interest rates for the first time in 17 years. If it does, Japan will end its long-term policy of negative interest rates, introduced to try to stimulate the economy by encouraging spending. The UN's deep-sea mining agency, the International Seabed Association, is to consider whether Greenpeace should be stripped of its observer status when it meets in Jamaica today. The environmental campaign group has been accused of disrupting a research expedition in the Pacific. The row concerns access to billions of dollars worth of cobalt, nickel, copper and manganese, which mining companies say are crucial for the transition to renewable energy. Greenpeace says sending machines down to collect the metals would cause irreparable damage to the last pristine ecosystem on Earth. BBC News.
Hello, this is Alex Ritson with the newsroom. The election in Russia may have been a sham as far as the West is concerned, but it proved that Mr. Putin has the ability to get himself declared re-elected as president on almost 90% of the votes cast, with no legitimate opposition challenging him. Nevertheless, Alexei Navalny, his fiercest critic who died in prison last month, still haunts him. On Sunday, Mr. Navalny's supporters were undaunted, visiting his grave in Moscow. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has this report.
For Vladimir Putin, 6 more years in the Kremlin. Russia's president is sounding more confident than ever.
Whoever might want to intimidate us, whoever might want to suppress us, our will and our conscience, they have never been able to do it and never will.
Then, Mr. Putin's first public comments on the death of jailed opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
You may be surprised, but a few days before Mr. Navalny died, some colleagues of mine told me there was an idea to exchange him for certain people in prison in the West. You can believe it or not. I said, I agree, even before he'd finished talking. So what happened, happened.
Election results on Russian TV, not a hold your breath moment. The winner, by a mile and a half, Vladimir Putin. What an incredible level of support and unity around the figure of Putin, he says, and a powerful signal to the West. But in this race, Vladimir Putin was, from the start, unbeatable. There were other candidates, but no serious challenger. Potential rivals here are swiftly removed from the political stage, forced into exile or put in jail. And elections tightly controlled by the Kremlin. But if they couldn't win, Mr. Putin's opponents could at least protest. And they did, in many parts of Russia. Opposition figures had called on Russians to flood polling stations at midday to vote against Putin or spoil their ballots, a symbolic protest against the system. I've never seen queues like this before at a Russian polling station. Before his death in prison, Alexei Navalny had backed the protest. It took courage to come. The authorities had warned that large crowds at noon would be viewed as illegal gatherings.
I was here as...
Ivan, not his real name, told me why he'd come.
It was important for me to see faces of other people who would come here today and to see that I'm not alone in my political views, and that there are a lot of Muscovites and other people who believe that Russia can be another country with another future.
For now, there'll be no change in the Kremlin. This election was never about would Vladimir Putin win or wouldn't he. Elections here are designed to ensure he wins, and wins big. From the outset, for the Kremlin, this vote was about creating the impression that Mr. Putin has a mandate from his people, not only for war in Ukraine, but also for what he's doing at home, transforming Russia into an increasingly militaristic society. But across town, Muscovites continued to pay tribute to Alexei Navalny, the man who'd wanted to be Russia's president. Here, a ballot paper, in place of Putin's name, Navalny's, and this message: he's the candidate we wanted. So, what can we expect from a fifth Putin term? I suspect more of the same. The direction of travel for Russia is pretty clear, and that means probably more repression at home and more confrontation with the West.
Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg in Moscow. Russian nationals have also been protesting and casting their ballots in cities around the world. Our correspondent Will Vernon spent the day outside the Russian embassy in Washington.
They brought banners, flags, and even set up their own stage. Russians living in this part of the United States queued in their hundreds to cast their votes, and many of them to protest too.
These are not elections. This is Vladimir Putin reappointing himself president of the Russian Federation.
In the queue was the activist Yevgenia Kara-Murza, whose husband Vladimir is a political prisoner, serving a 25-year sentence in Russia for treason.
With all political opponents of the Putin regime being either forced out of the country, put in prison, or physically eliminated. So this is not a legitimate procedure, and Vladimir Putin cannot be seen as a legitimate president of the Russian Federation.
Legitimate or not, Vladimir Putin's next key election date will be the 5th of November, when Americans go to the polls to pick their president. The Republican candidate, Donald Trump, often speaks fondly of Mr. Putin and is skeptical of supporting Ukraine. Joe Biden, on the other hand, has called the Kremlin leader a killer and a war criminal. He's trying to convince Congress to pass a bill granting $60 billion of desperately needed aid for Ukraine.
Will Vernon in Washington. The Israeli army is carrying out a military operation inside the largest hospital in Gaza. The assault started in the middle of the night. Israel says that senior Hamas fighters are using Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City as a command base from which to launch attacks against Israel. There are reports that tanks have surrounded part of the hospital. A spokesman for the Israeli Defense Forces, Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari, said that care was being taken to protect patients.
We have Arabic speakers on the ground so that we can communicate to the patients in the hospital in their own language, and IDF doctors to assist those in need. We will also be conducting a humanitarian effort to provide food, water, and other supplies to the patients and civilians in the hospital compound. We call upon all Hamas terrorists hiding in hospital, surrender immediately. Medical facilities should never be exploited for terror.
Hamas has accused Israel of committing a war crime by storming the hospital complex where tens of thousands of people have sought shelter, according to the Hamas-run health ministry. We have been hearing reports that Israeli soldiers have forced hundreds of people to leave the hospital and that there are dead and wounded people inside. Our Gaza correspondent Rushdie Abu Alouf is following events from Istanbul.
About 2:30 in the morning Gaza time, we got some reports about Israeli tanks moving suddenly towards the Shifa hospital. It's in the western part of Gaza City. We received like a video recorded call between two brothers, one outside and one inside the complex, and he said that tanks were around the place and there was some heavy shooting in the area. The Shifa hospital was, before was under attack for a long time, and it was not functioning for a long time, but since about 2 months, with the help of some of the international organizations, they got some equipment to the hospital. But the problem is that thousands of people who lost their homes since 7th of October, they are taking the hospital itself as a shelter. The Israeli army just said they have launched an operation inside Shifa hospital based on intelligence information that some Hamas officials are taking the hospital as a place to launch attacks into Israel, and they said they have opened a safe route for the civilians to go out.
Briefly, Rushdie, just tell me about the state of healthcare facilities for those Palestinians who are left in Gaza?
I mean, the situation, when we talk about health sector, is catastrophic. You know, more than 75% of the medical facilities across the Gaza Strip are out of service, and especially in Gaza City, there is only 2 small operations, one inside Shifa Hospital, where about 1 building out of 6 or 7 buildings used to be working in the hospital are now functioning. And there is another small place called the Lahni Hospital, was also targeted before, is semi-functioning. So the health situation is really catastrophic, especially in Gaza City and the north. It's the place that Israel now is sealed off, not allowing much medical equipment. Even those doctors and nurses who arrive into the Gaza Strip, they're only allowed to operate in the southern part of Gaza, in Rafah and in Khan Yunis, not in Gaza City. So the health situation is really in a catastrophic situation.
Rushdie Abu Aluf. You're listening to the newsroom from the BBC World Service. Our main news: President Putin has said that he'll prioritise the war in Ukraine following his overwhelming election victory. He claimed the result demonstrated the trust the Russian people place in him, and, emboldened, he's mentioned the late opposition leader Alexei Navalny by name. A BBC investigation has revealed extensive abuse of African women working in Oman as domestic servants. Dozens of Malawian women who've been lured there by recruiting agents have told BBC Africa Eye that they were beaten, raped and treated like prisoners while working in Oman. Azizat Olalua met some of those affected, and a warning that this report contains distressing details from the start.
I feel like I'm in prison. They threatened to stab me to death.
This is audio from videos which were recorded by domestic workers in Oman.
If I die, no one will know, because they will dump my body.
They are all from Malawi, one of the world's poorest countries.
The very first day I arrived, my passport was taken away from me. They know whatever they can do to us, we can never escape.
They share footage of their cramped, sparse living conditions, often communicating whilst hiding in a toilet in order to speak without being discovered. The women came together in a WhatsApp group after being duped by dishonest recruitment agents into going to Oman. Georgina was promised a lucrative job in Dubai, but instead, she found herself in the Omani capital, Muscat.
I
was not allowed to rest. I was waking up at 3 a.m. and going to bed at 1 a.m. The most difficult thing that made me desperate to escape was the boss forcing me to have sex with him. He threatened me and said if I shouted, he would shoot me. I got badly injured because it wasn't only him. He would bring friends and they would pay him after.
It's common for households in the Gulf to have live-in maids. In Oman alone, there are an estimated 300,000 domestic workers, most of them from Africa or Asia. Under the kafala sponsorship system, they are legally bound to their employer. Ekaterina runs an NGO which supports migrant workers in the Gulf.
The laws that are in place prohibit a domestic worker to leave the employer. She cannot change jobs and she cannot leave the country no matter how you are treated.
The Malawian government asked Ekaterina to help negotiate the release of over 50 women. The Malawi government says it has paid over $160,000 for these women to return. Ekaterina believes this sets a dangerous precedent.
The majority of these women have been released because money has been paid to the employer. How can you buy somebody else's freedom?
Oman's Labour Ministry has told the BBC that it's only received one complaint from a Malawian domestic worker in the 2 years to 2023. It said it is prohibited for employers to impose any form of forced labour on workers or to keep their private documents without their written consent.
Azizat Ololo with that report. Miami Airport has welcomed the first US chartered flight out of Haiti in weeks. The plane evacuating a few dozen American citizens departed from Cap Haitian, a port city almost 200 kilometers away from the gang violence gripping the capital, Port-au-Prince. The UN estimates more than 360,000 people were internally displaced, adding to an already complex political and security crisis. Our Central America correspondent, Will Grant, is in Cap Haitian. I asked him why so few people were on board the flight.
In all honesty, those who already wanted to get out from this particular part of Haiti where I am, on the northern coastal city of Cap Haitian, probably had other opportunities to do so over the past couple of weeks since the airports have been closed. Specifically, they could have taken either public transport to an extent, but certainly a private transport to the border with the Dominican Republic and just walked over the border there. Others might have been simply waiting to see if the international flights started up again from Cap Haitian, perhaps to one of the other Caribbean islands. There's been some evidence that they're beginning to start. And others simply consider it sufficiently safe and far enough from the violence in Port-au-Prince to stay put and are riding it out. It does speak to the fact that this is not a monolithic situation in Haiti, and that the violence seen in Port-au-Prince isn't uniform across the country. Cap Haitian is much calmer and has been the safe haven, a place of refuge for those fleeing that violence.
Are there any signs of the security or the humanitarian crisis improving?
Very little on either front. We'll start with the security side. No real indications of any advances there, and one has to wonder what would be considered an advance anyway. Is an advance successes by the police force in terms of striking back against the gangs or taking out some key gang bosses, or is it some kind of truce or ceasefire declared by the gangs themselves, given just how powerful they are, and that the fact that they control so much of the capital city, believed to be more than 80%. And on the humanitarian side, unfortunately, aid remains coming in at an absolute agonizingly slow pace. It really is just coming in a trickle, as far as we've heard, which is no way near sufficient for the scale of this crisis. I think people in Haiti who are in need of this aid, and we know that there is serious danger of starvation and extreme hunger in the capital, are desperate for that aid to come in, and very upset and confused as to why there hasn't been better coordinated and more comprehensive international response.
Will Grant in Haiti. The failure to eradicate invasive fire ants across Australia has been called an absolute shambles. The government inquiry has warned that they now pose a bigger threat to humans and livestock than wild dogs, feral cats, camels, cane toads and foxes combined. But what makes them so dangerous? A question I posed to Phil Mercer, who's been following this story from Sydney.
Well, you speak to experts in this country, Alex, and they say that fire ants are one of the world's worst invasive species, and they warn that they are on the march across Australia. Health experts have told this parliamentary inquiry that was set up by lawmakers in October of last year that thousands of Australians could develop severe allergic reactions if these ants become endemic in this country. They are animals or creatures that invariably attack en masse. They swarm, inflict multiple stings, their jaws lock onto a victim's skin, they arch their bodies and inject venom through a stinger or a spike on their abdomen, and the authorities in Canberra investigating the health, social and economic consequences of these fire ants.
And what can they be got rid of?
They were first detected in the Queensland city of Brisbane back in 2001, but it's most likely that they were here undetected for up to 20 years, probably hitching a ride in a shipping container. They have spread across Queensland's southern border into parts of New South Wales. They have been found at major ports, so all around Australia apart from Tasmania. And scientists say that Australia's climate and a lack of natural predators makes the island continent of Australia a perfect home for these fiery insects.
Phil Mercer in Australia. With the latest sporting headlines, Andy Barwell.
The Manchester United boss Erik ten Hag believed that for the first time this season matters didn't slip away from his team.
United defeated Liverpool 4-3 after extra time in the last of the English FA Cup quarter-finals, and it ended the hopes of a quadruple for Liverpool in a last season under Jurgen Klopp.
I cannot ask for more. I can't. The boys gave absolutely everything. We had a start was not great, and then our decision making was in some moments not great. We could have found a better player, the counter-attacks, but how we played in moments was absolutely exceptional.
Well, Manchester United will go on to face Coventry City of the Championship in next month's FA Cup semi-finals. The holders Manchester City will play Chelsea, got past Leicester 4-2. Interesting from the Chelsea boss, Mauricio Pochettino. He said that the fans should trust in the club, not him. And in the Premier League, West Ham had a couple of goals ruled out by VAR in a 1-1 draw at home to Aston Villa. Carlos Alcaraz and Iga Swiatek were winners of the titles at the Indian Wells Tennis in California. Former correspondent Russell Fuller reports.
Iga Swiatek, a winner for the second time in 3 years and a commanding world #1 once again after a 6-4, 6-love win over Maria Sakkari, in which she won the last 8 games of the match. And Carlos Alcaraz significantly winning his first title since Wimbledon last year. Only his first finals since August. Hardly a slump at the age of 20. There have been a lot of semi-final appearances along the way, but after recovering from 3-love down in the first set to win it on a tiebreak, he ran away from Daniil Medvedev, taking the second set by 6 games to 1, and he's the first man to defend the Indian Wells title since Novak Djokovic 8 years ago.
And thanks to a final round of 64, the men's golf world #1, the American Scotty Scheffler, finished on 20 under par, 1 clear of the field, as he took the Players' Championship at Sawgrass in Florida. He's now favourite to win the Masters.
Andy Barwell, thank you. It's hard to think of someone more comfortingly English than the singer-songwriter Ed Sheeran. So news that he's been singing in Punjabi has stunned his fans and set social media ablaze. It happened as in Mumbai, as the newsroom's Ella Bicknell reports.
And Mumbai, I would like you to make all the noise in the world for Diljit Dosanjh!
Nobody saw it coming. One of the world's biggest singer-songwriters singing in Punjabi with one of India's rising stars. Sporting his t-shirt, tattoos and guitar, he invited the Indian singer Diljit Dosanjh to perform Dosanjh's hit track Lover with him on stage, and all in Punjabi. The performance has gone viral on social media, totalling almost 2 million likes on Instagram. One fan said it was the crossover we never knew we needed, while Varun Dhawan, one of India's biggest film stars, simply wrote, "Global domination." As well as being a huge star in India, Dosanjh is quickly growing his international fan base. Last year, taking the stage of Coachella in California, as well as collaborating on a track with Cheap Thrills and Chandelier singer Sia. After Saturday's success, fans hope Dosanjh's next release will be with Sheeran, who has long celebrated other musical cultures. In the past, he's teamed up with Colombian singer J Balvin, and the Ghanaian rapper used ODG to release tracks in Spanish and Chi. And his 2014 hit Thinking Out Loud was also released in Irish Gaelic. This performance in Mumbai is just one of dozens of concerts before his world tour wraps up in September. Posting on social media, he described his time in Mumbai as incredible, hinting there was more to come.
Ella Bicknell. The main news this hour. President Putin has said that he'll prioritise the war in Ukraine following his overwhelming victory in the presidential election. Plenty more, as always, on our website at bbcnews.com. For now, from me, Alex Ritson, and the team, thanks for listening.
This is the BBC World Service, and for the Forum, Izzy Lawrence is looking at etiquette. Which cheek to
air kiss first? How to eat bread properly at the dining table? And if we could travel back in time to 16th century Renaissance Italy, what not to do when blowing your nose? The instructions on how to behave have been handed down from generation to generation.
The beauty of etiquette is that situations which may be stressful become predictable because of the script. So if you know the script, then you're almost guaranteed nothing will go wrong.
We'll be discussing where these rules of etiquette come from, who decides what they should be, and why they differ from country to country.
The Forum, Etiquette, Saturday at 12 GMT.
For thousands of years, humans across every culture have been crafting and performing with puppets. But what lies at the heart of our enduring fascination with these inanimate objects? I'm Dashiani Navanayagan, and today on The Conversation, I'll be joined by two puppeteers from Romania and Hong Kong. Together, we'll explore why puppets are such a powerful storytelling tool, capable of conveying deep emotions and complex narratives. Their stories after the BBC News.
BBC News with David Harper. President Putin has said he'll prioritise what he calls the special military operation in Ukraine after he secured another 6-year term. He said the election result had demonstrated people's trust in Russia's current path, but the vote has been condemned as a sham by Western governments. Meanwhile, Mr. Putin has made a rare public mention of the name of the late Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The president has previously appeared reluctant to acknowledge Navalny. Israel says it's launched what it called a precise operation in parts of Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. A military spokesman said Hamas leaders had regrouped in the complex and were using it as a command center. Hamas said Israel was again violating international law. Hundreds of people have taken to the streets of Cuba's second-largest city, Santiago, in a rare public protest sparked by a fresh wave of power blackouts and food shortages. Tensions have soared in recent weeks amid a worsening economic crisis. A BBC investigation has revealed that dozens of women from Malawi working as domestic servants in Oman have suffered physical and sexual abuse. The Labour Ministry in Oman said forced labour was illegal there. Uber has agreed to pay $178 million to compensate thousands of taxi drivers in Australia who claimed they lost income when the rideshare company aggressively entered the local market. The Policy Board of Japan's central bank meets on Monday amid expectations it will raise interest rates. If it does, Japan will end its long-term policy of negative interest rates introduced to try to stimulate the economy. The UN's deep-sea mining agency, the International Seabed Association, is to consider whether Greenpeace should be stripped of its observer status when it meets in Jamaica today. The Environmental Campaign Group has been accused of disrupting a research expedition in the Pacific in a row of access to billions of dollars worth of metals on the seabed. BBC News.
Hello and welcome to The Conversation. This is the show dedicated to highlighting incredible women from all around the world, one topic at a time. I'm Dashiani Navanayagan. Today, a world of magic realism. Do you remember that feeling as a child when you were able to suspend your disbelief so completely and utterly and believe in something wholeheartedly? That feeling of pure enchantment when you entered an unlikely world and the joy of being swept away. Maybe you loved playing dress-up and creating imaginary friends, or you escaped into fantasy fiction, or maybe you were entranced by watching and playing with puppets. You may look at puppets as a childish affectation, and you wouldn't be alone. It's the sort of playfulness that tends to fade as we grow up. But if there's a stirring of remembrance, then my guest today will open up the floodgates, because joining me are two extraordinary women who work with puppets and who firmly believe that the world of puppetry has no age limits. Joining me in the studio is Heather Lai, a London-based Hong Kong actor, puppeteer and theatre maker who trained at the Curious School of Puppetry. Heather's currently starring in My Neighbour Totoro at the Barbican Theatre. And joining us from Romania is Anna Creation Lambru, an award-winning theatre director and puppeteer. Anna has performed worldwide and has also featured on Romania's Got Talent. Welcome to you both. Hello.
Hi, nice to meet you. So happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. It's very good to have both of you here as well. I guess as children we all have that fascination with puppets, but for a lot of people their association with puppets starts as children, but it also ends when they're kids. And, you know, they might think as adults they've been there, done that, not for me as a grown-up. But Anna, you would disagree with this, right?
Yeah.
I knew you would say that.
Yeah, and it sounds even harsher in this voice that I have, because I have a cold. I kind of made it my mission to reconnect adults with their inner child in a way through puppetry. I have a master's degree at the University of Connecticut, and when I was there, our teacher told us about that suspension of disbelief, which happens when we are children, when we are vulnerable, when we believe in those magical things around us. I have a show, it's called The White Rabbit, and that rabbit, my colleague and I, we manipulate it in such a way that you can, it's hard for you to believe that that's just a puppet. Children ask, is it alive? Adults come at the end. Because they cannot really imagine that he's moved by us. We disappear for them. And in that moment, a suspension of disbelief happens to them again. And then they travel back to that point. And at the end of the show, some of them start crying. And they come to us and they say, I'm crying and I don't know why. And it's such a powerful moment for us and for them. Usually we hug them and we tell them, I'm sorry you're crying, but it's good because you went back to believe it. Those walls just exploded.
Heather, have you seen audiences connect with puppets in this way?
Wow, definitely. One show that I did before, which is called Would You Bet Against Us? It's about a football club, and it's also about a father and son relationship, except the father was played by a puppet. And I think because it's about football, we kind of like invited a lot of people who don't normally go to theatre. They're just die-hard football fans because they're like, I support this football club, I will go and watch a show about this football club regardless of what it is. I'll come in a football jersey and I'll sit there and I'll be like, yes, that's my team, and that's about my team's history. And it's actually so interesting because number one, they're not normal theatre goers. They come in and then they don't really know what to expect. They were quite shocked when and then they saw the puppet. And when the puppet first took a breath, I think they all took a breath together, and I think that's when I realised, wow, this is magical. And then slowly as the play progresses, they grieve with the puppet, they laugh with the puppet, and they kind of went through the journey with the puppet. It allows us a space to project whatever we want to project, or whatever we want to hear, we want to take away. Puppet actually is so generous in offering that space for people to do that. When the puppet died, so it was two people manipulating the puppet, and then the puppet kind of was on this piano. It's a mad play. The puppet was on this piano, and then two puppeteers manipulating it and manipulating the last breath. And as the breath ends, we kind of let go. So then there are no hands on the puppets. You can just hear a collective gasp from the audience, and then a lot of quiet sobbing. And I think that's something that I haven't quite experienced before.
And these were, as you say, quite die-hard
football fans. Yes, exactly. And to see that, it also allowed them a space to grieve or to mend or to heal. Something about that, it's just so generous.
Do you think that puppets can say things about us that maybe we want to hear or need to hear, but that human actors just can't? Why do we connect? What is that magic that makes people so entranced? How do they suspend their disbelief, Anna?
The puppet is not an actor that plays a character. The puppet is that character. The puppet is that father. All our lives are stories, right? Because our brain is so wired to listen to stories and heal through them, we tend to enter those stories and put all our heart and belief and soul. We live through those stories, and especially if the puppet is manipulated so well.
But I think you're on the point here, as in like, because you know it's inanimate objects, and because it's manipulated and you can clearly see it being manipulated, I think it invites the audience to work harder. You have to work harder to imagine that it's real, and with the skill of the puppeteer, you can imagine that very easily and very quickly. But I think because the audience are also doing half of the work, it's also a journey that the puppeteer, the puppet, and the audience are going on together. So it doesn't feel like audience will sit back and then kind of see how it unfolds. You are actively invested. And I think that's also what contributes to the magic as well, because it's like you're doing it together.
Tell us about the puppet that you're currently playing. So this is